Hello and welcome to another Back to Jerusalem podcast. I'm Eugene Bach, your host for this time, and I'm coming to you live on delay from somewhere within the borders of New Hampshire. I've just been to a funeral together with my dear friend Miriam Ibrahim. Her husband passed away, and I went with her and the children to attend the funeral and to pay respects to Miriam's husband and the father of her children, and have been here. I was actually wanting to allow all of my time to be dedicated just to taking care of her and the kids. However, there is something that is taking place in the news right now that I feel is absolutely imperative that I address right away, and that has to do with Candace Owens. Now, you need to know from the very beginning, I would love to do this in video form, but I'm not traveling to do podcasts at the moment. And that just basically means I'm not wearing my hat as I usually do. And so for security purposes, I'm just going to do the audio form of this podcast. And let's be honest, I mean, whenever I do a video podcast, it's never anything special, right? I don't have any special cameras. I travel with my phone. I have basic run-of-the-mill phones. Both of my phones are pretty old, one of them being made in China, so it's pretty cheap. And so I do my video with those, and they're like multifunctional. So the video quality is not good. I'm never in a studio. I don't have any of the things that Candace Owens has when she does her podcast. I have zero staff. I always do our podcast on my mobile phones as I travel around. I'm not on schedule. The reason why is I'm not a podcaster. I mean, anybody that knows that I'm not a podcaster. I do podcasts, but I'm not a podcaster. I write books, but I'm not an author. I start businesses, but I'm not a businessman. My main focus is I do whatever I can to serve the underground house church. So it really sits wrong when I see someone that has what in November of 2025 was the most viewed and downloaded podcast in the world come out and attack the underground house church of China, punching way below their weight, especially as Candace specifically went after Pastor Ezra Jin. So let's get into it. I was sent I haven't been following or listening to Candace Owens for many years. Full disclosure, I was a big fan. When she was with Turning Point USA, I was a big follower. Her style wasn't really my style. I loved her subject matter. I loved her way of discussing things. I liked her in small doses. But I was never somebody who came along and followed her on her podcast just because she communicates in a way that is just not my fancy. It's nothing against her. I loved her material. I loved her take on things. Even when she started to go anti-Israel, I felt that she brought up several good points that were worth listening to. So for instance, there was this attack that took place years ago against the American military by the Jewish military, which I love the Jewish military, love Israel, big supporter of Israel, but I think it is important that as Christians, we try to be open and listen to things that governments, because no government of man, no matter who they are without fault. I mean, as I work a lot with people that support President Trump. I also knew Christians that supported President Biden. Both of those Christian camps can very easily get into a rut where they only listen to their side and everything else is wrong. And I feel like that is a disaster. So I was open to listen to some of the criticism by Candace Owens, but like I said, I just couldn't follow her down some of the rabbit holes that she was going down. I listened in as much as I could, weighed out what the information that she was given, which I think was good, and I came to a different conclusion than she did. I do not believe a lot of her conclusions. I feel like she jumped to a lot of conclusions, but that's neither here nor there. If you really look at it, she probably spent more hours researching the things that she did when it comes to the historical activities of the Mossad or the Israeli military. By the way, again, another full disclosure, I have family members that are in the IDF. Loose family members, I'm indirectly related. They're in-laws for me, but a first cousin that is an in-law. Her children are all in the IDF. Her husband was in the IDF. I visited them in a little small Jewish settlement. They are one of the people that moved into these new Jewish settlements that are kind of dotted throughout the Palestinian territory. So going to their home to visit them wasn't the easiest thing to do. I'm not really connected with them that much, so I don't get informed from them on a regular basis, but I do follow them, and they are family members, so I do know a little bit about their situation, and I just was not able to come to the same conclusions as Candace. I felt, especially in Gaza, I sided mainly with Israel because Israel was attacked, and I do another podcast on that is in our archives. I share the information specifically on why the Palestinian area is called Palestine. Palestinians are not Arabs. Arabs are not Palestinians. That is not the language. That is not the culture. That is not the history. That is not the people group. That is not the DNA. So I go through all of that and kind of pick it apart, and that comes to a completely different conclusion than Candace Owens. But I will admit that I'm not an expert on the matter. I work with an organization that focuses heavily on preaching the gospel, and that's what I spend the most time on. That's why I am not a podcaster, even though I do podcast. I'm not an author. I'm not a businessman. Those things that I do because I am a servant and I serve the Chinese. And so I write books, not because I'm good at it, but because I have eyewitness accounts to a lot of things that I believe are historical that will be lost in history if they're not written about. And one of the things that I can say, if there is someone that knows a little something about the underground house church in China, Candace, it's me. I know a little something about it. I live in China now. I've been living and working in China for more than 25 years. I have been serving with the underground house church, including the underground house church that you specifically attacked and said works for Mossad or the CIA. The ideas that were shared and spewed on not just her X account, but also on an X account that she shared is something that is directly from the mouthpiece of the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party. The Chinese Communist Party right now are having a field day because they've just got the world's largest podcaster to take their side and support their efforts as they persecute the Chinese underground house church. Candace Owens, in her latest post on X, is promoting the Chinese persecution against Christians in the name of national security. She came out in defense of the CCP's policy against the Zion Underground House Church. Now, the Zion Underground House Church is a relatively small underground house church inside of China. They're nothing like the traditional networks in size or scope. When I talk about the traditional networks, I'm specifically talking about the Fangchang Network, the Chinese Gospel Mission, or the Chinese Gospel Fellowship. I'm specifically talking about Truth Network in Anhui Province, or Blessing Network in Anhui Province. So when we look at the traditional networks, we're talking about 10, 20 million believers in one network. The Zion Underground House Church Network is much, much smaller. but it continues to grow. The Zion Underground House Church Network was started by a guy by the name of Pastor Ezra Jin. I've written a little bit about Pastor Ezra Jin in my other articles that you can find in our archives online. I've been working with his leadership, especially since he has been arrested. And Candace Owens shared on her X account that, quote, I'm going to read directly from the quote that she put. As my episode yesterday revealed, under the guise of spreading Christianity and establishing churches, the Mossad and CIA are infiltrating countries. It's both a historical and present fact. They are also engaged in global trafficking. Okay, first, what are you talking about? It's both a historical and present fact. It's a historical and present fact that the CIA and Mossad are supporting churches, or they're infiltrating countries. Because it says again, I will say this again, under the guise of spreading Christianity and establishing churches, the Mossad and CIA are infiltrating countries. Okay, I can't speak about South America or different parts of Africa, but I can speak very well on the Middle East, many parts of Africa, and definitely China. I've been working with the top leaders. In fact, I'm one of the few authors that have written the biographies directly on behalf of those Chinese underground house church leaders that you can look up on Wikipedia right now that do not speak English and wanted me to tell their story to the West. Pastor Zhongrong Liang, probably the most well-known underground house church pastor in all of China, especially during the 1980s, 1990s, and early 2000s, with a network that is estimated to be more than 10 million believers, came to me and asked for me to write his biography together with him, and I did. I also wrote the biography of Pastor Shen, who was all over the news 20 years ago when he was kidnapped by the Eastern Lightning cult. Also, the founder of the China Gospel Fellowship, the largest, most well-known underground house church in all of China. Just a couple weeks ago, I was in China with the top leaders from different networks around China, including the top pastors from the most well-known official churches in Wenzhou, which is separate than the different networks. They have churches in Wenzhou of 5,000 to 10,000 people. And let me share something that I have learned in the last 25, 26 years working together with these underground house church pastors. I know they have never even one time been approached by the United States government or the Israeli government to do their bidding inside of China. At no time have I ever worked with the United States government, ever. I have worked with the Chinese government directly, but never with the United States government. Nor do I know of any of those pastors, and I've spent a lot of intimate time together with them, years, traveling together, living together, eating together, serving together in some of the most hostile regions of the world, in some of the most inhospitable places of China, and never has politics been discussed, ever. In fact, politics is one of my pastimes. I would rather watch a presidential election than the Super Bowl. I've never been a sports guy at all. I'm totally knee-deep most of the time in arguments about politics online, using a different name, of course. Because I have to be very careful about what I say about China, because at the moment, even though I don't go by my real name when I'm traveling inside of China, I still can easily be found out if the Chinese wanted to know who I am. I'm not a big fish in the pond. I'm very small and insignificant in the eyes of the Chinese government. I don't try to poke a bear. I don't try to say things deliberately against the Chinese government. The only thing that puts me at odds with the Chinese government is the persecution of the underground house church, which I feel compelled to share about with the rest of the world, just so the world can pray for our Christian brothers and sisters. Also, It is important when the government comes out and says there's absolute freedom inside of China for Christians. That is malarkey. That's the kind word that I'll share. That is baloney. It is an absolute lie that there is freedom for Christians inside of China. In fact, as I look at the posting of Candace Owens, she actually posted an article specifically linked to a post on X, posted by a guy by the name of James Wood, who goes at the handle name of Palmy. Commie as in communist, Palmy as in an Australian slang word for Brit. I don't know anything about him. I do know this. I did a very short cursory look at his website presence, or his presence on the web, rather, his footprint in social media. And the guy is a parrot for the Chinese Communist Party, which is why he's allowed to live in China, travel in China. And they even interview him and from what I understand, it sounds like he actually has written things that have been published by the Chinese state media. And is it any wonder? Because let me read from you the post that was reposted by Candace Owens. It says this: China detains Pastor Ezra Jin, leader of Beijing's Zion Church, a large unregistered Christian network that spread across multiple provinces and online after being shut down in 2018. Zion Church operated outside of China's legal registration system, refusing to join the state-recognized Christian council that oversees churches nationwide. Why freedom of belief is protected in China, unregistered religious organizations are illegal because they fall outside of transparency, oversight, and accountability laws. Guys, I'm not even 1/3 through this post, and this is chocked full of Chinese CCP propaganda. This is directly from China's lips. This is the same thing that you will hear in Cuba, the same thing you will hear in North Korea, the same thing that you would hear in the Soviet Union prior to the fall of the Communist Party in the Soviet Union, which is where China learned it from. China learned this from Marxism, who said that religion is the opiate of the masses. This is why, by the way, every single communist party in history has persecuted Christians. They say that Christianity is used to subvert people. In China specifically, they say that it disrupts social harmony. As I have shared before, the Chinese Christian Council in China, the very people that he is parroting, that this Palmy is parroting, has set up a new historical museum to take Christians, mandatory for all those that are training in the seminaries in China today, to walk through a historical timeline that demonizes missions in every single way and shows them as being an arm of the U.S. government or imperialists like the Brits. They show them as being a mouthpiece and a tool for colonialist governments, completely leaving out the schools, the hospitals, the anti-imperialism fight that was led by missionaries. And today, the Underground House Church of China is largely indigenous and has no connection whatsoever to foreign powers. And foreign powers are not supporting them, helping them, or helping them to spread throughout China. So this idea that freedom of belief is protected in China is a lie. And anybody that shares it is either ignorant or they're a liar or both. Ezra Jin's network, that I'm going to continue reading about Ezra Jin. Ezra Jin's network grew into one of the largest underground congregations in the country. No, it didn't. That's a lie. Ezra Jin's congregation is thought to be about 10,000 or more, not a million, not even a million. That is far below the other networks inside of China. So this guy doesn't know what he's talking about, doesn't have a clue. So it says this: Ezra Jin's network grew into one of the largest underground congregations in the country, raising funds, preaching online, and expanding without approval. That is the crux of the matter. They expanded without approval from the Chinese government. Something no government would permit indefinitely. No, that is a lie. China allows all faiths, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Taoism, but none are allowed to become politically or financially powerful enough to rival the state. Why, thank you, Palmy. In the West, churches can become mega corporations, tax exempt, massively funded and politically influential, lobbying governments, shaping policy, and amassing billions in untaxed donations. But because churches run freely in the West doesn't mean every nation should follow that path. Oh my gosh, this is straight out of the mouthpiece of the Chinese that say, listen, democracy is going to look different in China than it does anywhere else in the world. So China's democracy is going to be Chinese in nature. Just as American democracy doesn't look the same as European democracy, so too will Chinese democracy not. This is all a linguistic acrobatic performance so that they can absolutely shut down and persecute Christians inside of China. This is a war. This is persecution against Christians. Always has been. And as long as you have communists in power, it's always going to be anti-Christian. Let me say that again. Maybe a little bit louder for those sitting in the back together with Palmy. Communist governments are always going to persecute Christian believers. Always. Why? Because they adopt, especially in China, this is by law. A Communist Party member must be a card-carrying atheist. Atheists do not believe in Christianity. Atheists are put in charge of the Three Self Church movement inside of China. Atheists are put in charge of the China Christian Council. Atheists are part of setting the program for Christians to be educated. Atheists, those that hate Christianity or don't believe, let's be nice and say that they don't believe in any religion, which is a complete lie. Every single communist nation that we've ever seen create a religion based on their leader and founder. Today, I can drive in China and see taxi cab drivers with Mao Zedong photos hanging from the rearview mirror, not because they want to honor a dead leader, but because they believe that Mao Zedong can help them from the grave and actually be a good luck charm and protect their vehicle. Atheism, in my Christian opinion, is a spirit. It is not the lack of a religion. It is a spirit that at its core is anti-Christian, just like all the other false religions in the world. Buddhism, Taoism, Islam, Hinduism all have the same goal of persecuting Christians because it is a lie. These religions are a lie, including atheism is a lie. That is why every single communist nation in the history of man has persecuted Christians, thrown pastors in prison, killed believers, thrown church members into prison, and tortured them. It doesn't matter whether it's Russia, Romania, Ethiopia, Cuba, North Korea, or China. Why is it that everybody has more religious freedom in Christian countries? I have more freedom to be an atheist in Sweden than I do in China. I have more freedom to be a Muslim in America than I do to be a Muslim in Iran. Why? Because it's the same spirit. So when you promote atheism or you promote communism, you are at your very core anti-Christian, even if you don't know it. This is why the more socialist-leaning nations in the world are also the least likely to give Christians freedom. This is why pastors and churches are persecuted more in more socialist-leaning nations, the extreme socialist being communists. It says here, and I will continue reading the rest of this Palmy post, Western media are portraying Ezra as a victim, ignoring the fact that he knowingly broke the law. He wasn't punished for his faith, but for operating outside the rules that every religion in China must follow. China's system simply prevents religion from becoming a tool of power. It doesn't fear Christianity, it fears corruption and manipulation hiding behind it. This is an absolute lie. They absolutely fear Christianity. They fear Christianity at its core. Why? Because they can't brainwash people to follow the state, rely on the state, have faith in the state if they have faith in Jesus Christ. A person who believes in Christ isn't more of an independent thinker than the Chinese Communist Party want. And to say that they have freedom of religion is an absolute lie. It's one that is easily proven wrong by anybody that knows anything about China. So for instance, let me just go through. And the reason I'm going through this post is because Candace Owens shared this information from Palmy. And she is promoting this same idea that the reason why Pastor Ezra Jin was thrown in prison and is in prison right now today isn't because of his religious faith. It is because what he did was illegal. Well, what does that mean? I mean, a lot of people that are not familiar with China might be very sympathetic to the words of Candace Owens and Palmy. Those that don't understand the situation can very well say, oh yeah, you know what? Christians shouldn't be breaking laws. In fact, they should be upholding the laws. So what's up with that, Eugene? Why is it that you believe Christians should be able to break the laws? And if you break the laws, aren't you going to be arrested? The Communist Party of China has consistently held that Christians must register with the government. So their freedom that Palmy is promoting is that you can have freedom to believe what you want as long as you register it with the government. So if you register as a Christian and you attend a registered church, you have no problems. So Eugene, what's the problem with that? The problem is the registration is set up in a way to make many deny their faith. Why do I say many? Because China is huge. It's not a monolithic nation. I work with the Three Self Church. I work with the Chinese government. I know many official registered Christians that believe fully in the gospel of Jesus Christ. I've preached in their churches. I've worked with their believers, but, and this is where you have a challenge. Those are often small branches in areas that are considered to be insignificant in regions that are in the far throes of China, where China doesn't have a lot of control anyway, in places like Guangxi or Yunnan or Guizhou. These are provinces in Western China where I actually used to live. I no longer live in that area of China. I now live in a different area of China. But when I lived in the southwestern portion of China, there was a lot of freedom that the indigenous Christians had, many of them because they were minorities. They were from the Yi people, the Dong people, the Lisu people. These are people groups. You know, a lot of people don't realize that there are many different people groups inside of China that have a different history, different language, different foods, different culture, and different religions. So they're allowed off the hook a little bit. Even when China had its one-child policy, for instance, in Western China, many of the minority people were allowed to have more than one child, because their areas needed children to work farms. And the less children they had, the more the people had to rely on the state to take care of them. And the state was already struggling to take care of the few people that they had in those remote areas. When I say few people, I'm talking about the Han government officials that actually run the areas of Guangxi, Guizhou, Yunnan, Tibet, Xinjiang. The Communist Party officials are largely made up of the Han Chinese. China is extremely racist. It is an extremely racist country that divides people based on their ethnicity. I've lived there. I've seen it. I've witnessed it. I've been with people that have been separated from power because of their ethnicity. They were a minority. And so some of the minorities are left alone in the mountains of the more remote areas where they have a saying that says the mountains are high and the emperor is far away, meaning that you can kind of get away with what you want to because their rules don't apply to us in the remote rural regions of the western mountains of China. So many of them did register their churches. They did register their fellowships. Christians that attended did register themselves as being believers in attending these Christian churches. However, on the eastern seaboard of China, that is where you run into challenges, because in order to register, you have to agree to certain things. And this has been throughout Communist Party history. For instance, it is illegal for a registered church to proselytize or preach the good news of Jesus Christ. This is essential to who we are. What Christian would say, yes, I agree to not preaching the gospel? China's not alone in this, by the way. We have seen this throughout history in many different areas. We see this in India. We see this in Bhutan. We see this in Nepal. We see this right now in Iran. You have an entire sector of people, the Armenians, which are registered as Christians. They can attend church, they can do their communion, they can practice their faith, but it is absolutely illegal for them to proselytize. It is illegal for them to share their faith. It is illegal for them to share Bibles. It is illegal for them to accept people into their churches that are not Armenian. Meaning that if someone that is Iranian or Persian would like to go into the doors and learn from the people inside about what it means to be a Christian and even convert in their faith, that is illegal and can be punished by death. Apostasy is punishable by death. This is essentially what China does. When they make it illegal to proselytize, it's not just that they don't want you annoying passengers on a train in the subway in Shanghai preaching the gospel. No. You are not allowed to teach, advertise, or share about the good news of Jesus Christ outside of the walls of a registered location unless authorized to do so by the government, which would need permission and a permit. What Christian can agree to do that when this is the final command out of the lips of Jesus? Any Christian that would say that it is okay to make a law to not preach the good news of Jesus Christ, I would argue doesn't know the first thing about Christianity. Because Jesus himself, think about this, when you die, when you have a loved one that passes away or you yourself pass away, after you've said you love people, after you have said all the niceties that you want to say while you're on your deathbed, it's usually the deathbed that you want to say final words that you want to be remembered forever. This is why often at executions, the executor will often give the person being executed a time to share last words. These are the last thing that you want to say before you die. Jesus, to his disciples, before he went into heaven, before he left them forever. And then, of course, we can say he lives inside of them and a Holy Spirit. What I'm saying is that he, as a man on earth, left his disciples forever when he ascended in his physical form into heaven and promised that he would return back again in his physical form to conquer the all enemies of Christianity in the last day, when he would return back to Jerusalem, when he would come back to build his kingdom on the new Jerusalem. So as Jesus, before he ascended into heaven in Acts chapter 1, he specifically shared his last will, his last words, what we call the Great Commission. The Great Commission, by the way, is not in the Bible. There is no area in the Bible that says the Great Commission. We call it the Great Commission because it is the final words that Jesus left with his disciples before he ascended into heaven. And he said this: to take the gospel to all the nations, to preach from Judea to Samaria to the ends of the earth, to all of the people groups. When the disciples asked Jesus in Matthew chapter 24, when will the end come? When will all of these things that you're talking about come to pass? Jesus made it very clear in Matthew 24:14, a verse that I share all the time, that this good news of the kingdom will be preached to all the nations, and then the end will come. Christians, since the departure or the resurrection and the ascension of Jesus, have been faithfully awaiting his return. Every Christian that is a follower of Christ desires for him to return again. It is the heart cry, the heartbeat of every Christian believer. If you do not want to see the return of Jesus Christ, I would argue that you may not be a Christian. Every single believer hangs their hat on those last words of Jesus in Acts 1:8, Matthew 28:18, 19, and 20, to preach the good news to all of the nations, going from Jerusalem to Judea, Samaria, to the ends of the earth. That is a command by Christ himself. May I also submit to you to sit down and read the book of Acts. An elementary first-time reading of the book of Acts. This is not scholarly language. This is not something that I've come up with some epiphany about the book of Acts. The book of Acts is the record of the first century church after the ascension of Jesus, preparing for the return of Christ. And those Christians spread out from Jerusalem under persecution, preaching the good news even though they were told not to. Jesus himself was told to stop preaching what he was saying, that he was the Son of God. He was crucified because of the words that he was saying. His words were considered to be an act of sedition, which is exactly what Palmy is saying is happening with Christians today in China. The government of China is accusing Christians of seditious acts, separating from the government, preaching that which is not allowed. And what is allowed? Well, there's a general teaching within the Three Self Church of China that teaches that as a Christian, as a pastor, there are three subjects that, if not outlawed, at least you should stay away from. The virgin birth, because Chinese scientists have proven in all their divine wisdom that virgins don't have babies. A resurrection, because again, Chinese scientists have proven dead men don't rise from the dead. And a second coming, because God forbid China not be the most fantastical land on earth. Once you take away those three tenets, you have nothing left of Christianity. But the inability to preach the gospel is one of the things that the government requires of registered churches. That only those that come to you into the church, into a setting that has been authorized by the church, can be allowed for sharing from the Bible. Many Christians say, I can't do that. Christ is not something I do. He's not something I believe. He is who I am. The longer I live, the less that is me, the more he who is in me shines through me. I am dead and Christ lives in me. How is it possible for me not to share who I am with people that I meet on a regular basis? And that is illegal in China. In fact, the next regulation might be one of the most dangerous things that you can do inside of China. Why else would Chinese have a problem being registered inside of China? They can't teach Christianity to those under the age of 18. Why? Because that is where the state does their propaganda and brainwashing. That is why from the age of, guys, I built schools in China. Throughout China, I built schools, trained teachers, and supported Chinese teaching programs. In every school that I built, do you know what I had to do? I had to build a moral classroom. Do you know what a moral classroom is? This was mandatory. We had villages that we worked in that were too poor to even put up a shack where teachers could teach basic arithmetic, reading and writing, and give children a very elementary education. They didn't have the money to do that. So we came in and we helped build schools inside of China. And even though they didn't have the money to build schools, they demanded, the Chinese government demanded that every school have a moral classroom. They would rather have no school at all than a school without a moral classroom. What is a moral classroom? It is where children from the age of 3 begin to learn the tenets of atheism and Marxism. They know that if we are to change a generation, we have to attack the children. So you cannot teach children, even your own children, about Jesus Christ. Is that something you can agree to as a Christian? Think about your own life. Could you agree not to teach your own children the most intimate part of your entire life, what you believe will be a part of their life once they die, after death? Like all of the challenges, all the problems, all the hardships that you know that they will face in this life, to do that without Christ, and to look at eternity after death without Christ? Is that something that you would want your children to do? This is the registration process for the Chinese government that Palmy is promoting that they have, and is the very words that are being echoed by Candace Owens. I haven't even touched on it. And not only that, but if you are a pastor with the Three Self Patriotic Movement Church inside of China, or the Three Self Church, as it were. If you are a politician and you are requiring a Chinese Christian to register and they say no, it's not because they don't want to be legal. They want nothing more than to follow the laws of China, but they can't do so against their own convictions of faith. And what is that? Well, as a pastor Let's say that as a pastor, this has happened. Guys, I work with so many pastors that do exactly this. As a pastor, if you have 100 people that come to Christ in 1 month, you have to submit to the government the approval to be able to baptize those 100. And the government may not allow you. They may say that's too many. We will not allow that many to be baptized. We will allow you 3. What do you do with the other 97? Because let's say the next month, 100 more people come to Christ. Now you have 197 people that desperately want to be baptized. So then you go to the Chinese government and you ask, can I baptize these 197 people? And they say, no, we'll allow you another 3. Now you have 6 people that are baptized in 194 people. And the next month, you get another 100 people that come to Christ. This just continues to build up. Or let's say that you have a new believer that wants a Bible. Anybody that goes into China can say, no, I know you're lying. I've been to the bookstores and I've seen Bibles. Buy one of those Bibles. See how that works out for you. And you can say, oh, Eugene, I've bought a Bible in China. It was 0 problems. No problem at all. Congratulations. I'm happy you were able to buy a Bible. Now buy 10. Buy 20. I know I've done it. Guys, I've worked with the official printer inside of China, printing Bibles for the back door. I've bought printed Bibles that were legally printed by the government. With enough money, you can usually walk away with Bibles that the people need in the church. Otherwise, we have been forced to print Bibles illegally because China does not allow enough Bibles to be printed so that every believer can have their own Bible. Anybody that tells you otherwise is either ignorant or lying or both. I know, guys, I've been doing this for years. Trust me, printing Bibles is not the most sexy thing that we do in ministry. I would rather move on to other things that we are doing that I feel are a lot more exciting. Right now, I'm going into a hackers conference where we work with hackers from around the world to get the gospel of Jesus Christ into closed nations. Printing Bibles in an old archaic way that was, cool 200 years ago is not something that I would like to promote. And if it wasn't needed, I would tell you it's not needed. We have other things that we do besides printing Bibles. I write books and do podcasts and start businesses and help churches get established in North Korea and Iran and Somalia and Sudan. But printing Bibles in China is one of the things that we desperately need. Why? Because so many Christians that I work with, so many Christian leaders who go to Bible school without a Bible because the government doesn't allow enough Bibles to be printed or handed out. So why are Christians not registering with the government? Well, when you can't proselytize, when you can't share your faith, when you can't tell your children, when you can't baptize people that are coming to Christ, when you can't hand out the Bible, when you can't teach the very essence of Christianity, such as a virgin birth, a return of Jesus Christ, and a resurrection from the dead, these things make it impossible. Now, Zion Church went out of their way to register and follow legally. But they were banned by the government. Why? Because they were growing too fast. They were meeting the needs of the people that were coming to Christ, that were desperate for the message that they were sharing. And the Chinese government said, no, you can't do this. You can't preach the gospel to those that are hungry for it. You can't share the word of God with those that are desperately wanting it. You cannot do this because we as an atheist government have said you can't. And Zion Church was disbanded. Their registration was taken away. They have never worked with the CIA. They have never worked with Mossad. How do I know? Because only recently have I begun to work with them. And there are none of the people working with the state. They are desperate for help. And we are promoting their cause. Sharing with the world Christian body their hardship and what they're going through. This is typical inside of China. Guys, there's been Ezra Jins come and go year after year after year. It's only Ezra Jin that is making people like Palmy upset. Why? Because finally, the world has taken notice. Finally, they're like, wait a minute, maybe the mainstream media was wrong when they were saying that there is Christian freedom inside of China. Maybe if I go to China and I try to teach about Jesus in the streets and get stopped, I will understand why there's not Christian freedom. Oh, well, the Three Self Church says that there can't be any foreign interference. It has to be self-propagated and self-led and self-funded. Therefore, you can't have any international influence. Guys, I hate to tell you this, but if you've never heard it before, allow me to be the one to share it with you. Christians cling to our citizenship of heaven. We all come with the same Father. Those that follow Christ is a brother and a sister to me. That's why we refer to other Christians as brothers and sisters. Because we have the same heavenly Father. We are bound for the same destination. I have been compelled in my faith to not forget my brothers and sisters in China that face persecution. Yes, persecution for their Christian faith. Not because they're working with the government, because Zion Church isn't. I'm working with their leaders now. I'm supporting them from afar, helping them get legal counsel, which they wouldn't need if they were working with the government. I'm one of the few foreigners that work with some of the top leaders that I'm working with now. I don't know of any other foreign entity that is on the ground working together with the top leaders of Zion Church. That's not to say that there's not, but I do know that the language would be different if they were government driven. Why do I think that? Because I have experience. And I've been working with the underground house church leaders for years. Years and years and years. I've worked with them when they were young, and now many of them are in their retirement age. Traveled with them for months. And I see their heartbeat to preach the gospel to those that are in desperate need. And why? Why are they in such desperate need? Because the moment communism took over, the people suffered. And the suffering that the Chinese people have gone through has been unlike anything else in human history. You had at least 70 million people die under Mao Zedong from mismanagement of funds and resources and people being executed, people being persecuted. So many Christian pastors that I work with today were thrown in re-education camps and told how they had to believe their Christian faith. Those Christians know what it's like before they knew Christ. If you read my book, I Stand with Christ by Pastor Zhang Liang. If you read my book, Kidnapped by a Cult by Pastor Shen, they will both tell you about their pre-Christ situation, the suffering that they went through inside of China, and how the gospel of Jesus Christ was the only thing that brought light. It was the only thing that brought hope. It was the only thing that helped them in their time of need. And can they just benefit from the gospel and not share it with others? They have too much of a love for their fellow man. And though they want to obey the laws of China, when the laws of China go against the commands of Christ, Christians have no choice. But Palmy would rather you follow China than Christ. And anybody who promotes Palmy as well as Candace Owens, stand on the side of the Chinese Communist Party and against Christians. I want to thank you so much for your downloading this Back to Jerusalem podcast. Again, I'm Eugene Bach, coming to you live on delay from somewhere within the borders of New Hampshire this time. God bless.